All right, welcome everyone to the July 19th Kubernetes SIG Node meeting. We'll run through today's agenda item, which is mostly looking for feedback on PRs, but please add items to the agenda if you see it in there now. So first up was looking for reviews on the user namespace PR.
Yeah, so I think Rodrigo and Giuseppe can't attend, but I'm just relaying their message. So they're looking for reviews. I'm reviewing it. Would appreciate if someone from the Containerd side reviews it as well. Maybe Mike Brown or Ruben.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, that seems good. Next up was around Windows CR only pod sandbox stats. Anyone on the call been tracking this?
Yeah, so I added this item. I can give a description, or I think David Porter's also been reviewing it a little bit as well. So I'm just trying to add support for Windows to the cry-only stats KEP. There was a field there for Windows pod sandbox stats. I initially just copied over kind of the standard stats that we have for containers. But we were reviewing it, and there's a bunch of fields missing that Windows can't fill out. RSS, memory RSS is an example of that, where Windows just doesn't have that metric because of the way memory is implemented. And so we were discussing on the PR as to whether or not we make some of the fields specific for Windows. And so I think I tried to summarize what the remaining kind of questions are, but we'd like to get some more feedback from SIG Node on the direction that we're going here.
Yeah, I don't know if Peter's on the call, but one of the things that I know I would find helpful is, like, the original motivation for this was to basically stop depending on CAdvisor and letting the CRI return the stats. So, like, obviously it was very skewed to what CAdvisor was giving us today on Linux. I'm unaware of any update to the original KEP that just proposed the stats themselves that were pertinent to Windows. Is my memory right on that, or are we trying to maybe hash that out directly in the code?
Oh, go ahead, David.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, like for the original KEP, yeah, we did have a kind of focus on Linux stats. So there wasn't too much, because the Windows stats right now, I believe, come directly from the Kubla collecting them. So they don't come from CRI or CAdvisor for the most part. At least for pod level stats, the level stats. So anyway, the point is the KEP didn't really cover too much of the Windows side. So it's something we need to decide.
Yeah, so I guess what I was wondering was, is there anything that was written down that covered a Windows side that maybe we hadn't seen, or like maybe David and Peter, since you both were driving this, like, would you want to treat Windows in line with this, or treat it as like a separate evolution?
Yeah, I think the main idea is like ideally we were discussing this on the PR. I think ideally we would be able to reuse the same stats, like on the same CRI messages and stuff, because it would simplify the conversion code, like in Kubelet, where we would only have to have one path to convert the stats for for the summary API and stuff like that. So I think it would simplify things if we could reuse those structs. If if that couldn't work and we needed Windows-specific stats, I think it could work too. We would need a Windows-specific code path to convert the stats to like summary API and all the internal structures within Kubelet. So that's kind of how I see it. So I mean, if there is like no way at all to reuse the existing structs and they don't make any sense on Windows, then I think we could add Windows-specific fields, but would prefer not to if we didn't need to. It's kind of my general feeling on there.
Okay, so when I went into the Cry API for the new pod sandbox stats, there was two fields in there. There was one that was Linux Windows pod stats, and it had a bunch of information in it. And then there was a Windows pod sandbox stats, and it was empty. And so I'm trying to add. So I went to go add those stats to the Windows struct. And so if we're going to reuse them, I think we need to rename from Linux to something else that's more generic. But I guess we can continue this conversation in the issue.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think I had the same issue with the update resources API as well, where it was Linux specific, and I changed it to more generic. Maybe we should look at all the places and then do it in one go.
Sorry, where was that?
In the update container resources, it was Linux specific in the parameter. I changed it. So I think it would probably be a good idea to do a sweep and go through all the places where this has been an issue and take it in one go, maybe.
Yeah, and I do know for at least the container resources structs CRI API, we have been diverging there because we've needed to support more like Windows specific container setup stuff too. So I think we need to maybe just take it case by case if we want a generic kind of set of structures that are going to cover Windows or Linux, or if we want to diverge. And just make sure we're making the right decision for each one.
Yes,
I guess what I was struggling with was the in-flight work for Linux. Like there was like a enhancement record. Like I can look at a PR, I can look back in time and say how we felt certain ways. All I was just trying to figure out was, like, rather than hash this out directly in line in implementation, did anyone see a benefit in just writing out a design doc on like what is actually there on Windows? Like, so would that make it feel any more planned versus ad hoc is what I kind of view like is happening right here.
So James did do that on the PR. I think he did enumerate a lot of different values in the different fields, especially like CPU and memory, and say this is what maybe makes sense for Windows and Linux. So maybe we should take a look at that, and then if we need to get that added back into the KEP as like a supplemental tag, just so it's also captured there.
Yeah, I think that would make sense maybe to amend the existing CRI stats KEP, just have a little Windows section to describe what the plan is on Windows. I think it would make sense to have a plan of record for that.
Sure, I'll take that action and move it over to the KEP.
Cool. All right. That seems like the right first step. Honestly, I feel like we're trying to make it that when we make API changes that we have a corresponding design record, and it helps a lot. So yeah, if you're good with that, James, maybe we can get that going now and go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Was there something you wanted to add, Dawn?
I just want to share something. The earlier principle we talk about in the earlier Windows container discussing. So basically, it is if we think about those things, the stats will export surface to the control plane we want to generic as much as possible. But there's certain things we want to on the local node to make decision, because anyway Windows container Windows naturally don't support the C group, right? So we try to retrofit that concept, those abstract, to the Windows node. So I remember this kind of things I discuss with Mark in details in the past. So that's the principle we try to follow. So we don't want to, everything is kind of consolidate, same thing, but anything like a relay, what we are talking about, certain things, because it is in the scheduler and the control plane have to look, then we want to abstract. But certain things on the node side, we may don't want. So I just want to share here.
All right. So So I guess moving on to the next topic, Brett, do you want to give an update on the SRO KMMO?
Yeah. Thanks, Derek. Hopefully my mic is working. We submitted, I guess, about 11 days ago, recommendation to rename the current special resource operator repo to our next inline operator, which will be kernel module management. And we had approval. It looks like Dawn, you acted that for us through the mailing list, and just wanted to propose that again to see if everybody is comfortable on the call today. And if so, then we'll submit a PR and get the change in play.
Yeah, so I think the mail was good. I know, so Don, thanks for responding on that. I know Renal and I were able to catch up with Clinton as well to make sure there wasn't really a scope change here or an expansion of scope. So I think probably at this point you're good to open the issue, and I guess Kubernetes org or wherever that needs to be open to get the rename to happen. If you can just probably Slack me and Dawn directly so we don't lose it in a notification list, that would be good, because I think you do need a +1 on that when that happens.
Sounds good, Derek. That's all I had for today. So.
All right, Vinay, next up was the in-place updates. I know that you and Renal have been going back and forth a little bit. I just wanted to, do we think we're in a settled spot now to take another final pass?
Yeah, I think so. I think the main thing we wanted to get clarity on was to see how the update container resources is handled by the runtime and get clear guidance on that. Not too specific. We don't want to like micromanage it. But I think the main thing that we want is that when it receives the update container resources, it synchronously operates on it and then gives us a pass-fail result. That has been captured in the comments. I'll elaborate more on that when we get to the documentation as to why I really need it. It's a multi-container update scenario. We captured it in the KEP, but I'm going to put the docs as well.
Okay. I thought in our last discussion, we said we were going to try to get memory changed first before CPU, but we weren't necessarily going to block the implementation on that for alpha. Is that still where we basically were? And
yeah, I think doing memory first, we are already doing that in how the update container resources is called by kubelet. And I thought about adding that line as well, but I want to keep it a little bit more open for the runtime because we can still control that from the kubelet. When you look at the update from the atomicity of a pod level, that's what we can control and we can manage. How the runtime does it, as far as runtime goes, it sees one request at a time, and if it's amalgamated, we probably expect it to do memory first and then CPU.
okay.
Once we're calling it and we're expecting by stating that I want synchronous response, I'm already kind of putting that issue to rest, I believe.
Okay. So if anyone else wants to help take a final pass at that PR, that'd be good. Vinay, just to level set with you, I probably won't look at it until Thursday afternoon or Friday.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
I haven't made any major changes there's no changes at all. Mostly it's been rebasing whenever a few conflicts come up, and luckily there haven't been too many, 1 or 2 files here and there. So, but I'm kind of starting to get a little nervous that we're getting closer to the code freeze. I'm hoping that that gets pushed out a little bit because the enhancement got pushed out a week, right? Yeah, then we'll have more runway to see any issues to fix, that's all.
Okay. All right. Well, I will try to get to it Thursday at the earliest.
Thank you.
Definitely this week. So next item on the agenda was Jen with the local storage feature.
Yes, it's from me. So can I share my screen or?
Yeah, I think I just need to give you permissions. 1 second.
Or someone can share the screen, so like easy to see what I'm talking about.
I will hopefully make you co-host right now.
Yes, I think it works. So can you see my screen now?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, thank you. So this is a feature called the local storage capacity isolation. It's been beta for a while, and we do want to promote to GA. And this is a feature has a dependency on Kubernetes be able to check in the root file system usage where the Kubernetes is running. And we use Advisor to get root FS file system, like information about how much disk used, what's the capacity and what's available, what is used. However, there are some special like system in certain cases, especially related to kind cluster root list. I think Benjamin Elder bring out that those system is either like very hard or almost not possible to detect the correct root file system usage. And in those systems currently, since this is a beta feature, they can use the feature gate, right, to disable this feature during the CI testing. But when we move to GA, right, we need to remove the feature gate, and this will break those tests. And since I think this is an issue might not easily resolved, and we don't want to block GA, so I'm thinking whether we can add an option in Kubernetes side, right? So to basically disable or enable this, so that it represents whether the system has this capability. And if we call the feature, we call this option, for example, enable local storage capacity isolation. The default we can set it to true. And in those systems that they don't have that capability, right, to get the correctly root FS information, they could use that option to disable it. And if this option is set to false, and that means user cannot use this feature. And this feature, how use interactive feature is by setting informal storage in the pod spec, similar to CPU and the memory request and limit. And we can check whether if this is not enabled, and the user, if they also set request and limit, the pod creation can fail. So that's kind of the current proposal, how to unblock this to GA. And we want to get feedback from Signal side, right? Whether it is something we can proceed by adding option in Kubernetes side. And basically it's representing whether, right, the system has this capability of supporting this.
What's preventing, so today when the feature's in beta, it's on by default as well. What is happening in a kind environment?
So in certain kind environment, I think Ben mentioned for rootless, they have to disable this feature for the CI testing. Otherwise, the problem is if it cannot, get the root file system usage, we have the logic, the Kubernetes will not successfully start it. I think I post the link here. That is where the code is. So here.
So you're just saying they proactively disable the feature gate in that environment today.
Right. Otherwise, Kubernetes cannot start correctly. So during the container manager start, right, so we have the logic to check that we can correctly get it from seed advisor, the root FS information. If we cannot, it will return error. And here, I think it will fail to start container manager.
Shouldn't this one, if you, based on your suggestion, shouldn't some node already running for some while and they want to install Kubernetes and and the containerd, and then they will on the 1.20 then the Kubernetes will be crashed for sometimes.
Yeah, it will always like fail. I think if the seed advisor cannot get the root file system information. So the current kind of workaround for those system, right? Doing the testing, they just disable this feature.
A quick question. I'm just wondering, can the feature detect like if cAdvisor doesn't return those metrics or has errors returning them, basically like turn off the feature at runtime?
It's possible, but it's a little bit hard to really be very confident, like 100% sure it is because like a temporary error that you cannot get the information, or it is just the system does not has this capability. So I was also thinking that way earlier too, but yeah, I have this concern whether we can be very confident, right? We know it is just a temporary error, or it is because the system does not support this.
Gotcha. Yeah, I suppose you could check like if there was, if it was ever successful, it was always failing, you know.
Right. So I think yeah. So I think Benjamin will have more like context about this, but he is out of office. I can further discuss with him about that, and also at the same time want to see some feedback from SIG Node, right, about how if we can add option, and what's the process like. I can just have the code to add option, or there are some process like adding a Kubernetes option.
Well, I mean, the new option would end up probably in a kubelet config file, right? Or were you anticipating a different place to stick it?
Yeah, the Kubernetes config. I think before it's just direct option, and I see they recommend using Kubernetes config map or config option. What is called? So is there any like process doing that, or we can just go ahead to add the code? So this is the current Kubernetes option.
I just feel the one of the reasons we changed, and Kubernetes already have so many logs. It's so difficult for you to configure, right? I feel this one actually could be dynamic detect when the node start up, but we basically didn't. Maybe we couldn't, but just kind of maybe my gut feeling tell me we might could detect when the node come up and say, okay, enable this feature or not enable this feature. Instead, ask admin to manually configure that to the Kubernetes there, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. If we can automatically detect that this system, right, does not has this capability, and we can automatically kind of disable this, I think that should work the best. Just in case There are some challenges in doing that. I'm thinking, yeah, that's the option I'm thinking to add to Kubernetes option. So I will further like discuss with Ben about this, whether we can reliably detect. Otherwise, yeah, we may not have many other options.
Yes, I was trying to think through like the rootless kind environment. I don't know which audience might be upset or not if you say this, but like I didn't view it as a production environment. I view it as like a test environment. And so in that spirit, like I was trying to think through, is there a production environment where I would benefit by not having this feature on? And would those environments maybe have different file system layouts than what is needed by the feature today? And like, is that another thing we could use to detect if the feature should be on or off? Like if your host file system doesn't conform to a proper layout, versus like detecting if we can, you know, read something else, I guess. And so I could probably see cases where people would be okay with turning it off.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree all the like feedback suggestions. So here, like Ben mentioned, can do this, and also he checked some Minikube. I never like really tested those system, and I also don't know whether any production environment using those. So it's not common, but yeah, but there are some at least testing on those environments.
Hey, I had one question. So let's say if we disable this feature automatically in certain nodes, wouldn't that mean the ephemeral storage limit for the pod is essentially not going to get enforced?
Yes, it will not.
It actually wouldn't get scheduled, I think, because the scheduler wouldn't schedule to that request.
So yeah.
Let's say a node has enough ephemeral storage capacity. So let's say the scheduling succeeds, the pod comes up, but then it generates a whole bunch of logs or stuff that's consuming ephemeral storage and goes beyond the limit. At that time, the expectation is the eviction happens, right? So if it gets automatically disabled, wouldn't that unexpectedly cause certain pods to not get evicted?
Yes, if you disable this feature, yeah, basically the eviction will not happen. That is expected behavior.
Yeah, I just don't think scheduling would happen if a pod made a storage request. Basically, you would schedule pods that made no storage request just because they had best effort storage. But if you did make a request, then you probably wouldn't be scheduled if my memory serves right. If you had a limit and no request, then yeah, I guess that probably would be scheduled and would do what you described.
Yeah, there are two aspects, right? One is request, the other is limit. So request is basically scheduler check the capacity and whether it has enough resources requested by the pod, and then do the scheduling. But still, the pod could potentially use more resources, informal storage than requested. So we also have a limit there. So if you set a limit, then that means Kubernetes will check the usage and evict the pod if exceed the limit.
Yeah, and the key point was that you can exceed the limit. So I think even in the scenario that was described earlier, like it's not a hard XFS quota. So it's really just time bound on how quickly the kubelet and cAdvisor were able to check usage.
Right.
So you always have that risk window Was that Deep who said that earlier? I was trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's still the current behavior for this feature. But I think there is another feature called using the if the file system has the quota, right? Then they can use the quota. I think that way it will make sure it never exceeds the limit. So that feature I'm also checking right now is alpha, and I think it's trying to promote to beta, but it's a separate feature, yeah, using the file system quota.
So I guess like Don, I would prefer if we could like detect if it even would work and then just
Yeah.
probably not
Right.
report, because we don't really give a high quality of service guarantee on it today. If we had to add a flag, like I kind of view this similar to like enabling debugging handlers or tracing handlers and some of those knobs. I don't think there's anything too onerous about getting that added to the kubelet config types.go, but let's not. I would prefer we don't cross that bridge unless we don't have to.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So that's why, like, yeah, I will talk with Ben further, and if possible, we'll go that direction. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's for this feature. Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. But just in case there's some challenges, right? I think I still need to talk about the option for adding in kubelet. And I think, yeah, next week I will give a follow-up. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Oh, it's all right.
Jim, can I share another comment?
Yeah.
Just like what Deep said, without this feature, basically we cannot guarantee production cluster is the production ready. So I really think about by default, this feature should be on, and only some small cases like a Minikube, and also the kind cluster, they are on their own disable this one. So this is why I don't want to overcomplicate Kubernetes. So if we could detect that, auto detect, I'm okay. So let's just say, oh, here it is, we cannot do. And if we couldn't, I would rather just keep some lob, not the per Kubernetes lob. Some lob just for those exceptional cases. Instead, goes to then make that out of box. If we want to GA this feature, out of box always on that feature, but only there are some config at a high level disable that one. Instead, further complicate of the Kubernetes.
Okay, so you are thinking maybe there's also like some knob not through kubelet, but we can add some knob somewhere just to disable this.
At least all we understand the use cases is not in the real production cluster. We all agree, I believe at the earlier time, no matter the Kubernetes or GKE, actually the disk, without this feature, disk actually is the top one issue, even more than memory. Right? Memory, we have the basic the quality of the services, but this one we don't. So that's kind of a big problem for us.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yes. I think I agree, and yeah, I will follow up with that. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks. Last, Peter, I guess, do you want to give more of an update on the CRI stats beyond what we discussed earlier with the Windows topic?
Yeah, sorry, I actually missed the Windows topic. I had to be somewhere else. But thanks. So I wanted to check in about the work that needs to be done for the metric C advisor endpoint. We had kind of reached a sort of consensus on the kubelet being a sort of reverse proxy for the CRI to emit the C-advisor stats. And I wanted to check with everyone to make sure that that is the direction we want to go in. I chatted with David Ashpole a bit, and he did have some concerns about kind of the portability of the metrics, where if Containerd and Cryo and any other CRI implementation that comes up is solely responsible for producing those metrics, then they could end up being inconsistent. And so that was a concern of his. And I'm thinking the alternative would be passing all of the relevant metrics up through the CRI through protobuf, and then having the kubelet doing the serialization for Prometheus. And I am leaning towards that having a performance concern, especially when migrating away from C-advisor itself. So I'm leaning against that, but I just wanted to, gain a broader consensus and talk about it and see if anyone has any concerns about the approach.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for bringing that up. I also actually had some discussions with some folks in the Containerd community about this offline, like adding these metrics. Basically adding a metric the idea is basically to add a metric C-advisor analogous endpoint directly on the runtime, so directly on Containerd or Cryo, with the existing C-advisor metrics, like in the same schema, with the same label, so that people can basically just use the same endpoint and continue to use their exact same kind of Prometheus queries and dashboards and so forth. So there was a little bit concerned of putting this into like core Containerd from the Containerd maintainers, because it's kind of very specific to C-advisor and like the kubelet format, and actually Containerd already has a Prometheus endpoint today. So this is kind of a little bit duplicating the work on the Containerd side. So the discussion I had with the Containerd maintainers is maybe it makes sense as something like as a external plugin, so that it wouldn't potentially be, at least in the first version, included in core Containerd, but would be something that folks could install. So I guess the way I was thinking very high level how that could work is like, it could be something that people can install that would talk to Containerd to get those metrics, and then the kubelet could be configured to have its metrics C-advisor endpoint basically redirected somewhere. And that could be, for example, the Cryo Prometheus endpoint or the Containerd endpoint. But basically, I'm saying it won't be kind of an like people will have to change their configuration a little bit to install this or configure it properly.
Yeah, and from what I was thinking, it sounds like that direction would go with what we were originally thinking of, having the kubelet be a reverse proxy. Another thing that's worthy of note for this approach is that there may still be a slight performance concern. I talked with our internal monitoring team, and we were given advice that generally it's not super idiomatic to have the metrics be scraped through a redirect. And so there might be some issue there. So it may be best if the metric server was pulling directly from the CRI or this plugin or whatever. And the kubelet doing the relaying would only be for some user, like an end user who was using the kubelets, the kubelet HTTP API directly with curl, and relying on the all of the benefits that the Kube API provides for exposing that port.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the other thing that's worth to call out is if it would be directly done in the runtime, as you suggested, other options to collect all the metrics. Some of the metrics today are things like disk level stats, so that are actually used for pods. So for example, for the storage isolation feature we just talked about earlier in the call, right? And so today that isn't traditionally maybe tracked all those metrics by the runtime. So the runtime does not fully support basically right now all those metrics that we need. So if it would be something that we would add on top, then it'd be something we would add, because it's not the set of the core metrics that we support in the CRI right now. So that's the other kind of concern there.
Yeah, so we have basically here a couple of different directions that we can go in, and we've reach. It seems like we are leaning towards the kubelet as a reverse proxy only when emulating it for the user, and then have a metrics server pull directly from the CRI or a plugin to, you know, reach the level of efficiency that we had, you know, with cAdvisor. Can anyone think of anything else? Any other concerns with that approach or any advice along that line?
So
Yeah.
I have a, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so I think like at that point, like there'll be a lot of duplication, right? Like for most of the metrics, like what you implement in Cryo and Containerd. So what will be different when we hit these two endpoints? Maybe VM-based runtimes?
Yeah, I mean, well, as time goes on, you know, it's possible there will be different ways that we want to branch, like, you know, pulling the, I mean, some of the motivation of opening all of this and starting this whole process was pulling the, you know, them from a VM, which cAdvisor isn't really capable of, or like the way that Cryo drops the infra container confuses cAdvisor as of now. And so just allowing more customization within the CRI, while trying to keep the same, you know, the same metric names and everything so that we don't break existing users, but yeah.
So some of the work that we're doing within my team is we're looking at putting in basically a plugin model, and I'll put the RFC for that here, so that we can use a plugin to handle resources within the kubelet. And so my curiosity here is how that would affect the work we're doing there. Basically, the end goal for that is to take the existing managers, resource managers, so like CPU manager, memory manager, topology manager, and device manager, and pull them out so that they're in a plugin model. So then you can do stuff either through CRI and a runtimes layer, or you can do stuff with an external resource manager. So I think I'm trying to understand how it affects our approach as we go through this process.
I think, so I don't know what the level of integration that you expect to have with cAdvisor, but from just briefly looking at it, it looks like there wouldn't be very much interaction with this change. What this change is doing is basically taking some of the things that cAdvisor is doing and moving them into the CRI, because the CRI has a better view of the information that cAdvisor is trying to collect. And it doesn't really have anything to do with actual management of these resources, but just the reporting of the resources
Just how the resources are reported, not necessarily how we manage them on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That
Exactly.
helps clear that up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. I think maybe the one thing that we should consider is for the, like, I don't think there's too much duplication in terms of the core metrics, because those just come directly from kind of libcontainer, and those are kind of already pretty well standardized, and you know, libcontainer does a collection. But there's additional metrics on top, right, that are not collected today by basically, that are not like from the C groups. You know, stuff like total number of file descriptors, or like load average of containers and stuff like that, that people expect in the Prometheus metrics that we don't have implemented today. So maybe for those metrics, I think it does make sense that it's some type of shared library between Cryo and Containerd, because to avoid kind of the duplication that Mernal mentioned earlier. So maybe that's one thing we should consider.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to like reinvent the same thing on both the sides. So anything that we can do as a shared library, plus one.
Makes sense.
Sure, that's fair. And similarly, on the VM sandboxing side, Maxim is working on a new controller service to go into the Shem API that would enable these VM implementers to, you know, post up metrics that we describe as necessary for, you know, sandboxes. We should probably get together, you know, with Maxim on that.
Cool, thanks, Mike. We can do that offline for sure. Okay, do we have anything else on that topic, Peter? Or I think more or less we agree on that direction, but the separate Prometheus side, we can chat more on the Slack if needed, but I think it makes sense.
Derek had to drop off the call, so somebody else is going to have to run the show.
So I think next topic is Dawn.
Oh, sorry, I just I forgot to add there. So this topic is being discussed at the SIG Node for a while, and we start to have the proposal in the Google Doc, and a few of us include all the approval for the SIG Node and review that doc, and Derek recently convert that to the PR, and it's merged. And everyone agreed, and we have many contributors in the past want to know the requirement, how to promote to the reviewer and how to promote to the maintainer. SIG Node as the community actually we did because we don't publish that doc in the past, so but we did some other thing like the identify some sub project and promote people to the approval for the sub project. But now we finally have like this written doc and published, and anyone, we have so many contributors, and thank you everyone's contribution in the last. If you feel you are ready, please send us the PR request, and against that that written doc, and we will and let us know. And yeah, just want to let it, because this is kind of a Derek and I on the community. We should announce we finally have the approved and the doc for the requirement and published. Yeah, that's all. sorry, I was just keep coughing. That's all. Anything you want to add, Manu, and also Nantal? I think Nantal, yeah, Nantal is who as the reviewer, and I think the SAS, yeah, as the reviewer. Anything want to add here? Kevin's not here.
I think yeah, this is a great step in the right direction, and like I'm happy to see this landed, and happy to guide folks if they are looking for any.
I think that's all for today. Nantal, you did approve the original doc. But I think in the PR, you still own us. The community looks good to me.
Okay, yeah. I only reviewed the original Google 3 doc. Sorry about it.
Okay, that's all for today, I guess. Thanks.
Bye.